How do you react when you find your 7-year-old grandson shivering on the porch while his perfect parents laugh over Thanksgiving dinner inside? What do you do when the same family has used your money, erased your role, and told the child you love that you're not really family? This is how I went from quiet, unwanted grandpa to the man who walked through that door, said 6 words, and watched every face at the table go white. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Henry Lawson, and I am 64 years old. I live alone in a small one-bedroom apartment that still smells a little like salter and dust, even though I retired from electrical work years ago. On the morning of my grandson's 7th birthday, I sat at my kitchen table with a roll of cheap wrapping paper, trying to make a box look nicer than it really was. The gift was simple, but I had thought about it for weeks. It was a beginner's tool set for kids, with a little tape measure, a plastic level, and a small reel hammer with a rubber grip. I had also added a notebook and some colored pencils because I wanted to show him how to sketch little projects, the way I used to sketch jobs on scrap paper. I knew his other grandparents would bring big shiny gifts and things with logos I did not even recognize, but I hoped that something from my world might still mean something to him. I wrapped the box slowly. My hands are steady, but the paper kept slipping. I smoothed the tape down, wrote, "To Luke, love Grandpa Henry," on the corner, and looked up at the framed photo on the wall. It was an old picture of my late wife holding a baby Mark. I told her quietly in my head that I was going to be on my best behavior. No arguing, no making scenes, just a good, quiet grandpa in the background, like always. Driving over to my son's house, I watched the new houses roll by. Most of them looked the same to me. Neat lawns, white fences, big shiny cars in the driveways. Mark and his wife Jenna had bought into this neighborhood a few years ago, with a big help from the money I got when I sold our family home. It made me proud and sad at the same time. I had worked 40 years with my hands so he could live in a place like this, and sometimes I felt like he was now living in a world where people like me were not supposed to be seen. When I parked on the street near his house, I could already hear the noise from the backyard. Kids were yelling, someone had music playing, and there was the sharp hiss of a gas grill. Balloons were tied to the mailbox, and a big banner with Luke's name hung over the garage. I grabbed the gift, took a breath, and walked up the path. Jenna opened the door before I could even knock. She did not hug me. She just gave me a quick smile and said it was nice that I could make it, then looked down at the present in my hands as if she was checking if it was big enough. Before I could take off my jacket, she was already telling me there were extra chairs in the garage that needed to be carried to the backyard, and the drinks table needed restocking. I said I was happy to help. I am used to carrying things. That part has never bothered me. Inside, the house looked like a magazine. Everything was white and gray and gold. There were framed photos everywhere, but I noticed something right away. In almost every family picture, Jenna's parents were next to Luke, smiling wide. There were photos of Victor, her father, holding the baby in the hospital, cutting a first birthday cake, posing at Christmas. In most of them, Mark stood somewhere in the middle, and Jenna shined in the front. In only one small photo on a side table did I see myself, holding Luke in the park. It was half hidden behind a scented candle. I carried chairs out to the backyard. Victor was already out there by the grill, wearing an apron that said, "World's Best Grandpa." He saw me and raised his beer a little, like a lazy salute. He said I was just in time to help with the heavy lifting, and then he laughed and turned back to the burgers. Nobody corrected the apron. Nobody seemed to think it was strange. There were other parents scattered around the yard, talking in small groups. Jenna moved between them like a hostess in a show, making sure everyone had what they needed. When I tried to walk over to Luke, who was at a table with his friends, she caught my arm lightly and asked if I could please take out the trash bags from the kitchen. She told me the caterer had left a mess, and she did not want the guests to see overfull bins. I did it. I took out the trash, brought in more soda, and helped arrange the pizza boxes. Each time I passed through the living room, I heard Victor's loud voice floating through the open window from the yard. He was telling stories about his business days, about big deals, and travel. At one point, I heard him say to a group of men that he was glad his grandson would not have to scrape by with a toolbox, and laughter followed. Back outside, I finally got a chance to stand still. One of the other dads came up to me and joked that Jenna had found herself a good handyman for the party. He asked if I was with the catering company. Jenna heard him and laughed along. She did not explain that I was Mark's father. She did not introduce me. She just moved on to another group, leaving me there holding a stack of paper plates. After a while, someone called everyone together for games. I watched from the side as Luke ran around with the other kids, his hair sticking to his forehead with sweat, his cheeks red from excitement. The whole time, Victor stood near the game leader with his hands on his hips, shouting instructions and encouragement like a coach. When Luke looked over toward the adults, his eyes passed over me without a long pause. I wondered if he could even see me clearly from there. Later, Jenna announced it was time for family photos. She called for what she called a 3 generations shot. She told Luke to stand next to Mark and then pulled Victor to the other side of Luke, saying this was perfect. She handed her phone to me and asked if I could get the photo from a few angles. I froze for a second. I had thought she meant me. I had thought, just for a moment, that I would stand next to my son and grandson. I lifted the phone and did as she asked. While they posed, one of the aunts said that Luke was lucky to have such a strong male line, from Victor to Mark to him. She said those exact words. Nobody looked in my direction. I took the pictures, my fingers surprisingly steady. After that, I went back into the kitchen to help set up the cake. Jenna came in and told me I was a lifesaver. She said she did not know what they would do without me helping behind the scenes. I smiled and said it was no problem. I asked if I could sit near Luke during cake time. She paused, then said she had already arranged the seating so the kids could be near their school friends and the core family would be in the front row for photos. She suggested I stand near the back, since I was tall enough to see over everyone anyway. When it was time for the cake, everyone gathered in the living room. The lights went down, the candles were lit, and everyone started singing. Luke looked amazed, the way kids do when the whole room is focused on them. I stood at the back, holding more plates, watching the small flames dance on the cake. Victor knelt next to Luke, one arm around him. Mark stood behind them, his hand on Victor's shoulder. Jenna whispered something to Luke and then announced to everyone that this was a special moment for their son and his 2 role models. She asked someone to take a video. A guest took my place, holding the phone now while I just stood there. After Luke blew out the candles, Jenna encouraged him to give hugs. He hugged her, then Mark, then Victor. Victor told him loudly that this was what real family was like, all strong hearts and success. I heard the words real family very clearly, even over the noise. Then Luke turned around as if searching for someone. His eyes found me at the back of the room. He stepped toward me, but Jenna called him back. She said they still needed to cut the cake and that he could see Mr. Lawson later. The way she said my name made it sound like I was a neighbor, not blood. The crowd started to thin out as the afternoon passed. Parents collected their children, thanked Jenna and Mark, and complimented the decorations. I went back and forth between the yard and the kitchen, picking up trash, stacking cups, wiping down tables. Jenna told me again and again that I was such a help. She never said I was appreciated as a father or grandfather, just a help. Victor eventually sat on the couch with his feet up, a fresh drink in his hand. Elaine sat beside him, scrolling through photos on her phone. I heard her say that the pictures turned out great, especially the 3 generation shots. She said she would frame one of Victor and Luke for their mantle. Mark nodded and said that sounded nice. When I finally put down the last trash bag, I went to look for my grandson. I found him in the hallway, near the door, playing with a small plastic car. He looked tired but happy. I crouched down carefully, my knees protesting a little, and told him I was going to head home soon. I asked if he liked the party. Before he could answer, Jenna called from the kitchen that they were fine with the cleanup and that I did not need to stay any longer. Her voice was polite but firm. She said it like a dismissal from a shift. Mark appeared beside her, drying his hands, and gave me the same quick, distant smile he had given half the guests. I picked up my coat and the empty gift bag from earlier. I told them to have a good evening. Jenna thanked me again for all the work I did. She said the party could not have gone so smoothly without me. I agreed. Then she gently but clearly closed the front door behind me. The sun was lower now, and the air had turned cooler. I walked down the path toward my truck, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses from inside the house. I had just reached the sidewalk when I heard the front door open again. Luke slipped outside and ran down the path to me. He threw his arms around my waist, holding on tight. I felt his small hands grip my jacket. His voice was small and shaky as he spoke into my stomach. He asked me, in a quiet, serious way, if he was wrong to call me Grandpa, because his mom had told him not to confuse people anymore. The question went straight through me. I put a hand on his head and tried to steady my voice as I answered, but before I could say much, Jenna called from the doorway. She told him to come back inside and not to make Grandpa late. Luke pulled away slowly, looking up at me with wide eyes, as if he was waiting for me to say something that would fix everything. I told him I would see him soon and that he had done nothing wrong. Then he went back up the path, shoulders a little hunched, and disappeared into the house. The door closed again. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, the noise of the party faint behind the walls, the street empty in front of me. My hands felt empty without the plates and cups. I had never felt more like a stranger outside a house I had helped to pay for. The next morning after the party, I did not go straight home after my shift at the grocery store. I drove to the cemetery instead. It is not far from my apartment, just a few turns and a stretch of older streets. The grass there is always a little too short, and the stones all look the same after a while. But I know exactly where my wife is. I could find her spot in the dark. I parked the truck and walked over with my hands in my jacket pockets. The air was cool and smelled like wet leaves. When I reached her stone, I brushed a few stray blades of grass off the top and sat down on the old wooden bench nearby. I have talked to her more since she died than I did in the last years she was alive, or at least it feels that way sometimes. I told her about the party. I told her about the world's best grandpa apron on Victor, and how I had to take the picture instead of standing in it. I told her about Luke's hug on the sidewalk and his question about whether he was wrong to call me grandpa. Saying it out loud, even to a stone, made my chest feel tight. I said I was sorry that I had not done a better job preparing our son for the kind of pressure he let into his life. Sitting there, I could not help going back in my mind to when Mark was small. After she died, it was just the two of us in that old house. I worked long days as an electrician, fixed dinner at night, and helped with homework at the table. There were never fancy vacations, but there were camping trips, school projects, and late-night talks when he could not sleep. I always tried to be steady, even when I was tired. Back then, people told me I was spoiling him. Some of the guys at work said I was too soft, that a boy needed hard lessons. But I did not hit him, and I did not yell much. I thought my job was to be a wall he could lean on, not a storm he had to survive. When he wanted to go to college and study business instead of a trade, I said good, I would figure it out. I picked up every extra shift they would give me. I worked Saturdays. I worked nights when they needed emergency calls covered. I remember falling asleep at the kitchen table with my boots still on more than once. We saved for that house for years. My wife and I bought it when Mark was little, and we paid it down bit by bit. After she died, the place felt too big for just me, but I kept it. I told myself it was his childhood home, full of memories. When he moved out for college, the rooms felt even emptier. I still kept fixing things around it like someone was going to move back in any day. It was after he finished school, when he and Jenna got serious, that the talk about selling it came up. The market was good then. He had his first job, but he did not have savings yet. He wanted to move out of his rented apartment and into something that felt like a real start, as he put it. I remember sitting at the old kitchen table with him, the same table where he did his homework, and hearing him talk about neighborhoods and school districts and property taxes. I could see the worry in his face when he talked about the numbers. He wanted to give Jenna the life she was used to. Her parents had a big place, nice cars, country club membership. Mark did not say it directly at the time, but I knew he felt like he was running behind them, trying to catch up. I had savings, but not enough for a new down payment and my own place. So the idea came. Sell the house, use that money. I met with my lawyer, Patricia, back then too. I had known her since she handled my wife's will. We sat in her small office, and I told her I wanted to sell my house and use most of the money to help Mark buy one. She asked quiet questions, the kind good lawyers ask. Was I sure? Did I want to keep any of the equity for myself? She suggested we put the new house in a living trust with my name, so that if anything happened, my son and any future grandchildren would be protected. She talked about conditions, about making sure I would still have a voice if I needed it. At the time, I waved most of it off. I told her I trusted my son. I still do, in some part of me. She talked about a clause related to our relationship, about the idea that if I was cut off from my future grandchild for no good reason, I could adjust the trust. I laughed it off as dramatic, but she wrote it in anyway, in soft legal words I barely paid attention to. I signed where she told me and walked out thinking only that my boy would have the kind of house his mother would have wanted for him. The first time I met Jenna, she was friendly enough. She was very put together, very polished. She worked in marketing, always had perfect hair and neat clothes. Her family had money, and it showed in the way she talked about things, vacations, restaurants, school choices, even baby names when they were still only talking. She was not cruel then, just a little sharp. She liked plans. She liked control. She liked the idea of building a brand around her own life. I did not fully understand what that meant, but I heard the words a lot. Things started to change more after Luke was born. At the hospital, I sat in the waiting room for hours until they would let me see them. Jenna's parents were there too, and they went in first. When they finally wheeled Jenna into the room and handed her the baby, Victor was already beside her, making jokes with the nurses. Someone asked about pictures, and a nurse offered to take one of the whole family. Jenna pulled her parents close, and Mark leaned in. There was no room by the bed, so I stayed near the door. The nurse took the picture without really thinking about it. Later, when it came time for christening photos and first Christmas cards, I started to see the same pattern. In all the images they picked, it was Jenna, Mark, and Luke, with her parents in the background as the extra generation. There might be one of me off to the side at a barbecue or holding Luke in the park, but those stayed in cheap frames or digital folders. The ones that got printed on thick, glossy paper and sent out to friends and family did not have me in them. I remember one dinner at a chain restaurant when Mark had just gotten a promotion. Jenna had arranged it to celebrate. Her parents were there, dressed like they always were, like they were going somewhere more important after. I had worn my cleanest shirt and the only jacket I owned that did not have paint or dust on it. We ordered steaks and drinks, and they talked about Mark's future, about big things they could now plan for. Victor raised his glass and gave a little speech. He said he was proud that Mark had stepped up into our world and left the blue-collar grind behind. He said it was important for a man to set his sights higher than scraping by with a toolbox, and he put a hand on Mark's shoulder when he said it. I sat across from them, my hands wrapped around a glass of water, feeling my face get warm. Mark did not correct him. He did not say that the man who scraped by with a toolbox had paid for his college, his textbooks, his car repairs. He did not say that my overtime shifts and call-outs were what made that dinner even possible. He just smiled and looked down at the table like he did not know where to put his eyes. Elaine asked me politely about retirement, about whether I was keeping busy. She spoke to me the way people speak to a neighbor they barely know. Jenna talked about schools and activities for Luke, about sports teams and language classes. When I mentioned teaching Luke how to use simple tools when he was older, she smiled tightly and said they wanted him to aim higher than manual work. She said it as if I had suggested something silly, like teaching him to live on the moon. As the years went by, I was invited to fewer planning conversations and more chores. I did not notice it right away, because I was just happy to be included at all. If there was a room to paint, I painted it. If there was a fence to fix, I fixed it. When they moved into the current house, I was there early and late carrying boxes, assembling furniture, crawling around on the floor to check outlets. Victor came by at the end, after the hard work was done, with a bottle of wine and a speech about our new family base. They let me sign my name on a small thank you card they gave to the movers. That was it. At the cemetery, sitting by my wife's grave, all of that lined up in my head like a row of old receipts. The party, the apron, Victor's stories, the photos, the way they spoke about real family. It was not just one moment. It was years of small cuts, years of me saying it was fine. I did not mind. I just wanted my son and grandson to be happy. I stayed on that bench until my back started to ache. Finally, I stood up, patted the top of the stone, and told my wife I would figure something out. I did not know what yet, but I knew I could not keep pretending that none of this hurt Luke as well as me. It was not only about my pride anymore. It was about what kind of story he was going to be told about where he came from. When I got back to my apartment, the place felt even smaller than usual. I took off my jacket, set my keys on the counter, and went straight to the bedroom closet. On the top shelf, there was an old cardboard file box I had not opened in a long time. It was the one Patricia had handed me with a calm smile years ago after we finished with the house sale and the trust papers. I pulled it down carefully and carried it to the kitchen table. The lid made a dry, soft sound when I lifted it. Inside were neatly labeled folders, some yellowed at the edges. There were names and dates written in Patricia's careful handwriting. Bills of sale, bank records, copies of wills, all lined up in order. Near the back was a thicker folder with my grandson's name on it. It read, in blue ink, Luke, Education Trust, Property Trust, Conditions. I set that folder on the table in front of me and just looked at it for a long time. I did not open the folder that first night. I just sat there at the table with my hands on either side of it, like it might go off if I touched it wrong. The words on the tab made me think of my grandson's face at the party, his small hand gripping my jacket and his worried question about whether he was wrong. I told myself I was only going to look, to remind myself what I had signed back then, nothing more. But I was tired, and my eyes felt heavy, so I slid the folder back into the box and shut the lid. I told myself that whatever was in those papers had waited years already. It could wait one more night. I pushed the box back to the corner of the table and went to bed with the TV still on for background noise. Sleep did not come easy. A few days passed. Life went back to its usual pattern. I worked my few shifts at the grocery store, stocking shelves and chatting with regular customers. I ate simple meals alone. I watched some old shows. Luke texted me once from Mark's phone, a short message that said he loved the tool set and wanted to build something with me soon. I stared at that message for a long time. When I replied and suggested a weekend soon, there was no answer. Later, Mark sent a short note explaining that their weekends were full with activities and that they needed some family time without too many visitors. He wrote it in a polite way, but the meaning was clear. I tried not to push. I told myself to be patient. Then, one cold afternoon, my phone rang while I was in the middle of putting cans on a shelf. The number was from Luke's school. My heart jumped in my chest. I wiped my hands on my apron and answered. The woman on the line spoke gently and said she was calling because Luke had not been picked up on time. She reminded me that I was listed as an emergency contact. She explained that they had tried Mark and Jenna already with no luck. She asked if I could come. I told my manager it was a family emergency and drove faster than I should have. The sky was gray and low, and a thin wind pushed dry leaves down the street. When I pulled into the school parking lot, there were only a few cars left. The buses were gone. The main doors looked big and empty. Luke was sitting on a low wall near the front entrance, his backpack at his feet. He had a thin hoodie on, no hat, no gloves. His cheeks were red from the cold, and he kept rubbing his hands together. A staff member stood nearby, arms crossed, trying to keep warm too. When Luke saw my truck, his face changed in a way that made my throat tighten. He looked relieved and embarrassed at the same time. I walked over and apologized to the staff member for the delay, even though it was not my fault. She said it was all right, but her eyes were tired. She said they had called his parents more than once. She said she was glad someone could come. There was something in her tone that told me this was not the first time something like this had happened. Luke climbed into the truck, and I turned the heat up as far as it would go. His fingers were stiff when he tried to pull the seatbelt across. I helped him and tried to keep my voice calm when I asked if this had happened before. He shrugged in that small, defeated way children do when they have already decided that complaining does not help. He told me his mom had said she got stuck at work and his dad was in a meeting. He said there had been a mix-up about who was supposed to come. Then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned that sometimes they were late and that he waited with the office lady. This time, he said, they had to call me instead. He said it like a simple fact, not like something that should worry anyone. I asked him gently if he had eaten. He said he had a small breakfast, but no lunch, because they had been running late in the morning and his mom had said he could buy something at school. Then he skipped over the part about buying anything and started telling me about a game they played in class. I let him talk, but I did not forget. Instead of driving straight to his house, I pulled back into the parking lot and went inside to sign him out properly. The secretary at the front desk looked tired too. I told her I was his grandfather. She nodded like she already knew who I was. She said the counselor wanted a quick word, if I had a minute. The counselor's office was small and warm, with children's drawings on the walls and a soft carpet. Ms. Ramos was her name. She had serious eyes, but a kind voice. She asked me to sit, and she explained that she had seen a few worrying signs over the past months. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger a formal report on its own, but enough to make her keep notes. She said there had been a pattern of lateness, of forgotten lunches, of sudden mood changes on Monday mornings. She told me that Luke sometimes spoke about feeling like he had to be perfect, or else he would be sent away. She did not accuse anyone of anything. She just laid out facts, carefully, one at a time, watching my face as she spoke. I listened. I did not interrupt. I felt something in my chest shift from a dull ache to something colder and more focused. When she finished, I asked if she was documenting these things. She said yes. She had dates and short descriptions, in case she ever needed to refer to them in detail. I thanked her for caring about my grandson. I told her I would make sure he got home safe today. I did not promise anything else, because I did not yet know what I could promise. But as I walked back to the truck, the air felt different. It was like someone had wiped fog off a window, and I could suddenly see the outline of objects that had been hidden before. On the drive to Mark's house, Luke talked about school again, about a class project, and a friend who liked dinosaurs. I made the right noises, but my mind was moving through other things. Late party pickups, thin jackets, the way Jenna had talked about teaching him lessons, the trust folder on my kitchen table, the clause Patricia had mentioned years ago, and I had laughed off. All of it started to line up in my head, not as random annoyances, but as a pattern. When we reached the house, there were no cars in the driveway. It was already starting to get dark. I did not want to leave him alone, so I parked and walked him to the front door. He reached under the mat and pulled out a spare key like it was a habit. That bothered me in a quiet way, too. He let us in, and we stepped into the silent hallway. I told him to go change into warmer clothes while I waited in the kitchen. I poured him a glass of milk and found some crackers in the pantry. When he came back, he looked smaller in a big sweater. He ate like he did not want me to notice he was hungry. I noticed anyway. After about 20 minutes, the front door opened. Jenna came in carrying shopping bags, her phone in her hand, talking quickly. She stopped short when she saw me in the kitchen. Right behind her, Mark walked in, his tie loosened, his face tired. For a moment, their surprise was clean and honest. Then it shifted into something defensive. Jenna asked what I was doing there, stressing each word like I had broken into a private place. I told her the school had called me because Luke had not been picked up, and I had brought him home. I described the cold, the wait, the call. I kept my voice calm. I did not raise it once. My hands stayed still on the table. She said it had been a simple scheduling mistake. She said I was overreacting. She said it was hurtful of me to imply they did not care about their own child. Mark, standing behind her, nodded a little and told me they had things under control. He said emergencies happened and that I needed to trust them as parents. I felt heat in my face, but my tone stayed level. I said this was not about one late pickup. I mentioned the counselor's comments about patterns, about lunches, about Luke's words. I said I was worried. Not angry, worried. I said someone had to pay attention if things kept slipping through the cracks. That was when Jenna's expression changed from calm annoyance to sharp hostility. She told me that bringing up the counselor was a line I should not cross. She said I was trying to make them look like bad parents. She said I was using Luke's worries to get back at them for setting boundaries with me. The word boundaries came out like a shield she had been waiting to use. She reminded me that this was their house, their child, their rules. She said if I could not respect that, it would be better if I took a step back from day-to-day involvement. She said Luke needed stability and that my emotional reactions were not helping. Every phrase sounded like something she had practiced in private or maybe read online. Mark stepped forward then, as if to play peacemaker. He told me to try and see things from their side, how busy they were, how hard they were working, how much pressure they were under to keep everything together. He said they appreciated my help, but that I sometimes made things heavier by bringing up problems instead of solutions. He said I should stop stirring things up. Then he said something that stayed with me long after I left. He said if this kind of confrontation continued, they might have to manage without my involvement for a while. He called it a break. He said it in a careful, measured tone, like he had thought about that sentence ahead of time. Luke stood in the hallway, half hidden behind the doorframe, watching us. His eyes moved from one adult to another, trying to understand. I saw his shoulders tighten when he heard his father talk about a break. I saw the fear that he might lose me too, if the grown-ups decided so. I looked at Mark then, really looked at him. I saw not just my son, but a man who had built a fragile, shiny world with people who told him he owed them everything. A man who was so afraid of losing that approval that he would let his own child's needs come second. A man who would let his father stand outside his life, useful only when there were chairs to carry and trash to take out. Something in me settled. It did not explode. It did not break. It simply settled into place, like a piece of equipment finally clicking into the right slot. I told them I understood. I told them I would not argue. I told them they would not have to worry about me dropping by uninvited. Then I picked up my jacket and walked past Luke. I put a hand lightly on his shoulder as I did. I told him I would see him soon. I did not say when. I did not promise anything I was not sure I could keep. Outside, the air was colder. The sky was dark now, with only a few weak lights from the houses around. I sat in the driver's seat of my truck and closed the door. For a moment, I just stared at the steering wheel, listening to my own breathing. My hands started to move before my mind caught up. I took out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I saw Patricia's name. My thumb hovered over it for a second. I thought about all the times I had decided not to make waves, not to rock the boat, not to be the difficult one. Then I pressed the call button. The screen lit up my face in the dim cab as the phone started to ring. Patricia picked up on the second ring. Her voice sounded exactly the way I remembered it from years ago, calm and steady, like nothing in the world could rush her. She asked how I had been. I told her I was fine and then admitted that this was not a social call. I said I needed to talk about the house, the trust, and my grandson. She did not act surprised. She just asked when I could come in. 2 days later, I was sitting in the same chair I had used when I signed the trust papers after selling my old house. Her office had changed a little. There were more files, a new computer, but the same neat stacks of folders and the same small plant on the windowsill. She offered me water and then asked me to tell her everything from the beginning. Not just the last few weeks, all of it. So I did. I talked about the party and the apron, the photos, the way Jenna kept me out of the frame. I told her about Luke's question on the sidewalk. I explained how the late pickup happened at school, how he had been waiting outside in the cold, how he said he had not eaten much that day. I repeated what Ms. Ramos told me about patterns of lateness and forgotten lunches. I described the conversation in the kitchen when I brought Luke home, the way Jenna had framed it as me attacking them, the way Mark had talked about a break. Patricia listened without interrupting much. Sometimes she wrote a note, Sometimes she leaned back, her eyes half closed, as if she was fitting pieces into place in her mind. When I finished, she did not rush to give advice. She asked a few simple questions. Had I seen similar things before? How often did I see Luke? Did anyone else witness these moments? I answered honestly, even when the answers made me feel foolish, like when I admitted how often I had let small insults slide just to avoid tension. Then she pulled out a file from her cabinet. It was thicker than I expected. It had my name, Mark's name, and Luke's name on the tab. She said it was the trust package we had created years ago. She reminded me of the structure. The house was in a living trust with me as the trustee and Mark as the beneficiary under certain conditions. The college fund was in a separate educational trust with Luke as the beneficiary and specific language about his relationship with me. She talked about something she had called a respect clause back then. She told me that, in careful legal terms, it gave me the right to adjust or redirect the trust if I was pushed out of my grandson's life without good reason, or if I believed his welfare was being neglected. She said I had shrugged at this part years ago, but she had insisted on including it, because she had seen too many grandparents cut off after giving everything. I sat there, feeling a strange mix of regret and gratitude. I regretted not taking it more seriously before. I was grateful she had insisted anyway. I asked her what could actually be done, in real terms, if things kept going this way. She did not make big promises. She explained that anything involving a child would have to go through careful steps. She said courts cared about facts, not feelings. She told me that if I wanted to use any of the tools in those papers, I would need records, dates, witnesses. Not just stories about being hurt, but clear examples of how Luke's needs were not being met. When she said the word records, my mind went back to Ms. Ramos's careful notes, to the tired look on the school secretary's face, to the neighbor across the street who always seemed to be watching the block. Small pieces started to line up. Patricia suggested I start writing things down. She said I did not need to file anything that day. She told me it was better to move slowly and be sure. But she also said something else, very quietly. She said I had more power than I realized, not because I knew how to fight, but because I had spent my life being responsible. The house, the education fund, the history of support, those were all things that meant something on paper. She reminded me that the people who now treated me like an extra were living inside decisions I had made for them. I left her office with a few photocopies and a feeling I had not had in a long time. It was not revenge. It was not anger. It was a kind of calm firmness, like the feeling of tightening the last screw on a job and knowing the connection was solid. The next stop was the bank. The trust officer there was younger than me, with a neat beard and a crisp shirt. He spoke in a smooth, practiced tone. He pulled up account summaries on his monitor and turned the screen slightly so I could see. He walked me through the house valuation, the status of Luke's educational fund, the expected growth if nothing changed. He explained some options in general terms about how trustees could redirect or freeze certain assets under specific conditions. I did not ask him to do any of that yet. I simply asked questions. Could a trustee require certain conditions for continued benefit? Could distributions be paused if there were concerns about the beneficiary's behavior? Could notes from a lawyer and a counselor be attached to the file? He answered yes in most cases, with the usual formal limits and warnings. When I left the bank, I had not signed anything new, but I understood the map better. I could see where the roads led if I ever decided to drive down them. Back at my apartment, I cleared the kitchen table. I took everything off it, even the salt and pepper shakers. Then I brought out the old file box and set it in the center. The lid came off with that same dry sound. This time, I did not hesitate. I took out all the folders and laid them down in a neat grid. I made new labels with sticky notes. One said school, another said house trust, another said messages, another said witnesses. The last one, a blank manila folder, I labeled timeline. I started with what I already knew. Under school, I wrote the date of the late pickup, the time of the call, the name of the secretary, and the key points from my talk with Ms. Ramos. I left space for more. Under messages, I printed out the text from Luke about the tool set, Mark's reply about needing family time, and a few past messages where Jenna had talked about boundaries and limiting outside influences. Then I thought about the neighbor across from Mark's house, Mrs. Green. I had waved to her a few times when visiting. She always seemed to be at her window or tending her small garden. Once, she had told me she recognized my truck now and that I was a more regular sight than some of the other relatives. I wondered what she had seen on days I was not there. The next afternoon, I drove by Mark Street without stopping at his house. Instead, I parked a little way down and walked up to Mrs. Green's place. She opened the door as soon as I rang, like she had been waiting for something to happen anyway. I told her I was Luke's grandfather and that I needed to ask her something sensitive. She looked me in the eye and said I could come in. We sat at her small kitchen table. The place smelled like coffee and old wood. I asked her if she had ever noticed Luke being left outside alone or situations that worried her. I did not push. I just waited. She sighed and said she had seen him on the steps a few times in cold weather, once with his coat unzipped, another time without one at all. She said she had almost gone over, but she had not wanted to create trouble. She admitted that she had taken a short phone video once, just in case something happened. She said she could send it to me if I wanted. I did not cheer or show relief. I just nodded slowly and told her that if she ever needed to talk to someone official, she should tell the truth about what she had seen, no more, no less. She agreed. Her hands shook a little when she handed me a piece of paper with her phone number on it. There was worry and guilt in her eyes, but also a small sense of relief, like finally someone else was willing to see what she had been seeing. A few days later, I met with Ms. Ramos again during her office hours. I told her I was keeping notes now. I asked if she would be willing to provide written records if a court or a social worker ever asked about Luke. She said her job was to report facts. She said she had already started documenting earlier patterns, and that if someone requested them through proper channels, she would supply them. Hearing that, I felt that same click in my chest, another piece locking into place. On the surface, nothing dramatic was happening. I was not shouting. I was not kicking down doors. I was writing dates and careful numbers on lined paper. I was saving short videos onto a small USB drive that now lay in the center of my kitchen table. I was printing out messages and placing them into plastic sleeves. It felt more like wiring a house than fighting a battle. At the same time, I pulled back from Mark and Jenna in the way they said they wanted. I stopped dropping by. I answered messages with short, polite replies. When Mark sent a long text that said they felt judged and needed space, I did not argue. I agreed that some distance might be good. I told him to let me know if they ever needed anything. I did not mention that I was already acting on that statement in a very different way. Weeks passed, leaves fell, the air got colder. The grocery store started putting up holiday displays. Early pumpkins, then plastic turkeys, then fake snow. I worked my quiet shifts, stocked shelves, and went home to my kitchen table covered in evidence. At night, I sometimes stood by my window and looked at the old photo of Mark as a boy on my wall. I thought about how many lunches I had packed, how many times I had been the one racing to pick him up before the school doors locked. I told myself I was not doing this to punish him. I repeated that thought until it felt solid. I was doing it to protect a child who did not have the power to protect himself. One evening, after a long day, my phone buzzed with a notification from the family group chat that I was still part of. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the image preview. It was a photo Jenna had posted of her refrigerator door. On it was a glossy printed invitation with fall leaves around the edges. In the center, there were words about a big Thanksgiving dinner. She had written a message under the picture that said it would be a close Hale Lawson family gathering this year. Very intimate, just the core group. My name was not mentioned. Victor had replied with a comment about how he would bring his famous carved turkey set, and Elaine had added a string of heart emojis. Mark had simply written that it would be good to have everyone together. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated again. This time it was a direct message from Luke, a photo taken from his small angle. It was the same invitation on the fridge, but closer, slightly crooked, with his shadow in the lower corner. No words, just the picture. I looked at it for a long time. Then I put the phone down on the table, next to the USB drive and the files. I walked over to the wall calendar hanging by my front door. I picked up a red pen from the counter and very slowly drew a circle around the square that held the word Thanksgiving. Under it, in small letters only I would see, I wrote one word. 4 p.m. The red circle around Thanksgiving stayed on my calendar like an eye watching me every time I walked past the door. Days moved toward it whether I wanted them to or not. I went to work, I stocked shelves, I nodded at customers, but there was a part of my mind that never left the kitchen table with its neat folders and the small USB drive in the center. About a week after I drew that circle, I went back to Patricia's office. This time I carried a worn canvas bag instead of just my hands. Inside were printouts of messages, my handwritten notes, and a small notebook where I had written dates and times in careful numbers. When I set the bag on her desk and started pulling things out, she raised her eyebrows slightly, impressed, but she did not say much at first. She spread my notes out and read quietly. She asked a few clarifying questions. How often had Luke been left outside? Who had been present, whether I had told anyone besides her? I showed her the message from Ms. Ramos where she confirmed she had records. I mentioned Mrs. Green and the short video she had sent of Luke on the steps in cold weather. Patricia nodded slowly. She said the pattern was clearer now. She explained, in her even voice, that if I chose to act, I needed to be prepared for pushback, denial, and anger. She told me that people who rely on image often react badly when the image is tested by something official. She reminded me that once certain things were set in motion, they would not be easy to undo, and that I should be sure I was doing this for Luke, not to punish his parents. I sat there for a moment, looking at the papers on her desk. I thought about Luke's thin hoodie at the school, his empty stomach, the way he had asked if he was wrong to call me Grandpa. I thought about the apron at the party, the photos, the talk of core family, and the casual way Mark had said they could manage without my involvement. I told her I was sure. Not happy, not eager, just sure. She pulled several forms from a drawer. She went through them one by one, explaining each in simple terms. Some were about my role as trustee and what I wanted to do with that authority if certain conditions were not met. Some were related to reporting concerns about Luke's welfare through proper channels, not rumors or anonymous calls. One was a formal statement, to be attached to the others, where I described what I had seen and heard in my own words. My name appeared on each page in neat printed letters. There were blank lines under them. Patricia slid a pen across the desk to me. She did not push. She just waited. I signed slowly, reading each page as I went. I wrote my full name in letters that felt heavier than usual. I initialed where she pointed. When I was done, she gathered the stack, tapped it on the desk to straighten it, and put it into a manila envelope. She wrote a date and a few words on the front. I noticed that the date matched the one I had circled on my home calendar. She said she would take care of her part, and that there was one stop I needed to make myself, at the county building. She explained which office, what to say, and what to hand over. She told me I would receive confirmation by mail and email. She reminded me again that this was not about winning an argument in a kitchen. It was about making sure Luke was seen by people whose job it was to see children properly. The county building was busy when I went there the next morning. People moved through the lobby with folders and briefcases, some angry, some tired, some just lost. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. I took a number from a little red machine and sat in a plastic chair with the sealed envelope on my lap. The number on my ticket blinked on the screen eventually, and I stood up, feeling like I was stepping over some invisible line. At the counter, I handed the envelope to a clerk who had the worn look of someone who had heard every story under the sun. I said I had documents my lawyer had prepared, and that I had been told to file them there. He checked a list, stamped a receipt, and slid it back to me without much comment. He told me I would receive notices about scheduled dates in the mail. That was it. No speeches, no drama. Just a soft thump of a stamp on paper and a file sliding into a back bin that would, in time, end up on someone's desk. Back in my truck, I sat for a while before turning the key. The building loomed in front of me, gray and plain. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder. I began to speak slowly, stating my name, the date, and a brief summary of the past months. Late pickups, missed meals, Luke being put outside to calm down, the birthday party where he was told not to call me Grandpa in front of other people. I did not add emotion, I just added facts. When I finished, I sent the file to Patricia and to my own email so it would not vanish into the phone like smoke. Then I called Ms. Ramos's office and left a message saying that I had taken steps to make sure Luke's situation would be looked at, and that someone might contact her at some point asking for her records. I thanked her again for paying attention when others did not. Life between that day and Thanksgiving moved in a strange, double way. On the surface, everything looked normal. I worked, I bought groceries. I watched the leaves in the parking lot turn from red to brown and get swept into piles. Underneath, there was a steady, quiet hum of scheduled processes I had set in motion. Emails being sent, files getting logged, dates being placed on calendars I would not see. On my own calendar at home, Thanksgiving got closer. In the family group chat, Jenna posted photos of her table decorations, polished cutlery, tall candles, name cards written in careful script. Victor made jokes about carving the turkey like a pro. Elaine wrote about her pies. There was no direct mention of me. Mark did not send a private invitation. The only sign that anyone on that side of town remembered I existed was another short message from Luke, asking if we could build something together after the holidays when things calmed down. The morning of Thanksgiving came cold and clear. I woke early, not because I had to cook for anyone, but because my body was used to early hours. I made coffee and sat at the table, looking at the folders. I did not need them all anymore, not physically. Many things were already in other hands now. Still, I picked one slim folder and slipped a few key pages inside it. I closed it and held it for a second, feeling its weight, which was more than the paper itself. Around 3:30, I put on my coat and gloves. I set the folder on the passenger seat of the truck. Before I started the engine, I opened my phone and set the voice recorder to start as soon as I pressed the screen. I did not know if I would need it, but habits from electrical work stayed with me. Always measure twice, always keep a record. The drive to Mark's neighborhood felt like driving into a different season. The streets were lined with cars. Windows glowed warm in the fading light. I could see shapes of people moving inside houses, laughing, gathering around tables. When I turned onto his street, I recognized a few vehicles from Jenna's side of the family: Victor's large SUV, Elaine's small luxury car. I parked a short distance away and sat for a moment, listening to the faint hum of distant laughter reaching even outside the house. Then I stepped out into the cold air and started walking toward the driveway. As I got closer, I saw a small shape on the front steps. At first, I thought it might be a pile of extra decorations, some forgotten pumpkin or wreath. Then it shifted, and I saw Luke, sitting on the concrete with his back against the door. He had on a sweater, but no coat. His knees were pulled up, his hands tucked under his arms. Every few seconds, a small cloud of breath showed in front of his face. On the step beside him sat a paper plate with some food on it, mostly mashed potatoes and a piece of turkey gone cold. My chest tightened in a way I cannot fully describe. I walked faster. When he looked up and saw me, his eyes widened first in surprise, then in something like relief that hurt to see. He tried to stand, but his legs were stiff from sitting on the cold step. I crouched in front of him and asked quietly what he was doing outside. He told me in a small voice that he had made a scene at the table when he asked where I was and why I was not there. He said he had started to cry when Jenna told him it was a family-only dinner. She had told him that if he was going to act babyish and embarrass them in front of her parents, he could sit outside and calm down before he came back to apologize. He said it like he had been told it was normal, like this was just how things were done. I took off my gloves and wrapped them around his small hands. They were cold to the touch. I slid the gloves on him and helped him stand up fully. I told him he had done nothing wrong by missing me. I told him that grown-ups sometimes forgot what mattered. My voice stayed level, but there was a hard edge under it now that even I could hear. Behind the closed door, I could hear faint sounds, clinking cutlery, bursts of laughter, Victor's voice louder than the others, saying something about how good it felt to have just the family together. It reached us through the wood like an echo of every smaller moment that had led to this one. I looked at Luke's red cheeks, his thin sweater, the paper plate of cold food on the step. I thought about the house, the trust, the files now in drawers and on desks downtown. I thought about schedules already set, letters already printing in some office I would never see. I realized this was exactly the scene every piece of paper had been moving toward, like wires toward a junction box. I put one hand gently on Luke's shoulder and turned him so he was slightly behind me, out of the direct line of the door. Then I stepped forward onto the top step, reached for the doorknob, and closed my fingers around it. The metal was warm from the heat inside. I could feel my own pulse in my fingertips. For a second, I stood very still, listening to the muffled sound of the people who thought they had finally shut me out. Then I turned the knob and pushed the door open. Warm air and bright light rushed out when the door opened. For a moment, everyone at the table just stared. I saw Mark at the head of the table, a carved turkey in front of him. Jenna sat on his right, shoulders straight, smile frozen. Victor was on the far side with a carving knife in his hand, mid-story, his mouth still open. Elaine held a glass of wine halfway to her lips. Other chairs were filled with Jenna's relatives, plates loaded, faces turned toward the sound of the door. Luke stood behind my shoulder, half hidden. His small hands, inside my big gloves, held onto the back of my coat. Nobody moved, but eyes flicked between me and the child at my back. I felt all of them waiting to see if I would stammer an apology and retreat like a man who had walked into the wrong house by accident. Instead, I stepped over the threshold and said my 6 words. I told them that nobody ate while this child froze. The room went quiet in a way that felt heavy. It was as if every sound had been cut off at once. Then the noise rushed back, but now it was sharp and jagged. Victor spoke first, his voice raised, asking what I thought I was doing and saying I had no right to barge into their private dinner. Jenna demanded to know why Luke was outside with me, twisting the story so fast it almost sounded true. I did not answer the attacks. I simply said that I had found Luke on the front steps with cold food on a paper plate and no coat after he had been sent out for crying because he missed me at the table. I said it clearly, so every person at that table could hear each word and picture what I had just seen. Faces shifted. Some guests looked down at their plates. Elaine's hand trembled slightly around her glass. Mark's jaw tightened. Jenna started to say that I was exaggerating, that Luke had only been sent out for a minute, that he had chosen to sit there. I raised a hand slightly and said I would not argue with her about feelings tonight. I said I was here about facts. I walked to the corner of the table and set the slim folder I had brought in front of Mark. I told him quietly that inside was a letter from my lawyer and copies of filings made at the county office. I said a formal report about concerns for Luke's welfare had already been submitted, with dates and observations, and that Miss Ramos at the school and Mrs. Green across the street were listed as contacts. I said a social worker visit was already scheduled and they would be receiving notice soon. Victor scoffed and said I was trying to weaponize the system to punish them. He said no one would take me seriously. I told him that the system did not need his respect to function. I said it needed records, and it already had those. Then I told Mark about the other part. I reminded him, in front of everyone, that the house they were eating in was held in a living trust with me as trustee. I said that years ago, when I sold my own house to fund his start, my lawyer had advised we include certain conditions to protect any future grandchild and my relationship with that child. I told him that, in the past weeks, I had exercised those rights. I explained, still calm, that if a court or social worker found that Luke was being neglected or cut off from me without cause, the trust now required the property to be sold and the proceeds placed into a fund managed for Luke's benefit, not theirs. I said that, until then, Mark's beneficial interest in the house was now tied to complying with any court-ordered changes and maintaining a basic, respectful relationship between Luke and me. Jenna tried to say they would get a lawyer and fight it. I said they absolutely should get a lawyer, and that Patricia's information was in the letter on the table, along with the case number for the filing so their attorney could look them up. I added that, as of that morning, the college fund for Luke had been frozen from their control until the situation was reviewed. Mark finally spoke then, his voice low and rough. He asked how I could do this to him. I told him I had not done it to him. I had done it for Luke. I said that I had raised a boy alone and knew what it meant to carry responsibility, and that I could not stand by and watch my grandson become a prop at a table where he could be sent into the cold for crying over missing someone who loved him. I said I would not yell, I would not stay, and I would not discuss this again in that room. From now on, I told him, everything between us on this matter would go through lawyers, social workers, and court dates already in motion. I told him that whether he chose to stand with his in-laws' pride or his son's welfare would be his decision, but that there would finally be real weight on both sides of that choice. I turned to Luke and told him, in a steady tone, that none of this was his fault, that missing someone did not make him bad, and that grown-ups were supposed to protect children, not punish them for needing love. Then I stepped back from the table. Chairs scraped, voices rose, Jenna's sharp, Victor's loud, Elaine's thin and anxious. But I did not answer. I walked to the door, opened it, and let the cold air in again. On the porch, I pulled the door closed behind me. The sudden muffling of their voices felt like someone turning off a noisy TV. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I led Luke down the steps, away from the cold patch where he had been sitting. When I glanced at the screen, I saw new email notifications, one from Patricia, confirming filings and scheduled dates, another from a county address, acknowledging receipt. I put the phone back without opening them and walked toward my truck with my grandson beside me, leaving the warm, bright house and the stunned people inside to read the folder I had left on their perfect holiday table.